climate change debate in America is an understatement. Is an understatement. Day in and day out, Americans are told fossil fuel usage is evil. It's emitting gases that are heating up our planet, and if we don't do anything about it, the Earth will burn up in a catastrophic climate event. Lawmakers then propose legislation that will save our planet, but have drastic changes within them, including eliminating the usage of fossil fuels. It makes sense why Americans would have doubts and questions about the measures proposed and even the science behind the claims. After all, the modern world was built upon fossil fuel usage. But those who have these thoughts are demonized. Bill Nye, the science guy, as we all know him, a prominent climate change alarmist, said he is open to jail time for climate skeptics. It was not always like it is today. How did all this climate craze begin? Climate change alarmism started back in the 80s when scientists began to see a warming pattern in the Earth's temperature. They attributed it to the increased use of fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution. Fossil fuels, when burned, produce carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases trap infrared heat energy radiated from the Earth. Without them, the Earth would be about 60 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. Now carbon dioxide, according to NASA, has increased from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million in our atmosphere over the past 150 years. That means for every million molecules of gas in the air, carbon dioxide makes up 400 of those molecules. That is 0.04% of our atmosphere. NASA says that increased fossil fuel use is responsible for this, although there are other natural sources for CO2 like respiration and volcanic eruptions. But as the Earth has seen an increase in CO2 levels, it has also seen a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit global temperature increase. With the increase in carbon dioxide occurring alongside a slight global temperature rise, it makes sense why scientists would believe there's a correlation between CO2 and global temperature. Because of this belief, alarmists go further and claim that if carbon emissions go unchecked, we will see our planet increase in temperature to a point of no return, leading to a catastrophic climate event. Therefore, lawmakers have proposed drastic legislation to eliminate carbon emissions. But I, and many others, see flaws in climate alarmism. I'm here to say that climate alarmism is based on theory and speculation, and people should take caution before accepting the drastic measures lawmakers propose to combat the threat. Today, I will be giving insight from a climate skeptic's point of view into the three main parts of climate alarmism: the causes, effects, and actions. My point is to show that there is more to the story than we are commonly told, and to give a case for climate alarmism. As I previously mentioned, carbon dioxide is commonly regarded as the major cause at play in the climate change we are experiencing now. But it's really just one small part out of many that affect our Earth's climate and the trends it goes through. We need not look further than CO2's greenhouse gas big brother, H2O. Water vapor is commonly overlooked in its role in climate change. It is the most abundant greenhouse gas. Meteorologist Jeff Habe says on average, water vapor makes up around 2 to 3% of our atmosphere. Compare that to the 0.04% of the atmosphere CO2 makes up. But not only is water vapor the most abundant, it also has the greatest impact on climate. Dr. Alan White from Answers in Genesis says, quote, "Water vapor and clouds are responsible for 80 to 90% of the total greenhouse effect," end quote. Now, CO2 doesn't sound like the only variable in the equation. To add on to that further, let's look at sunspots and their impact. Sunspots are dark areas with lower temperatures on the sun's surface. They result from strong magnetic fields that appear there, inhibiting hot, new gas from reaching the surface. The average size of one is equal to that of the Earth. The important thing is the sun goes through 11-year cycles where the number of sunspots varies from a maximum to a minimum. Solar radiation is known to increase dramatically during high sunspot activity, because with more cool areas, the sun has to make that up by increasing its output elsewhere on the surface. Research shows that Earth's climate is sensitive to very weak changes in the sun's energy output over time frames of tens and hundreds of years. It has proven that previously. From about 1300 to 1850, the Earth went through a little ice age, a time when the global temperature change was about the same as now, but negatively. A period of lower sunspot activity correlated with the little ice age. Thinking back to modern day, according to Scientific American, sunspot activity overall has doubled in the last century. Something to think about. Other influences on the Earth's climate include the tilt of the Earth, volcanic eruptions, and weather patterns like El Nino. I think to have a complete view of the causes of climate change, it is important to reevaluate CO2 and the things we aren't told about. After some research, I'd say it's pretty interesting. First, CO2 has not had a history of correlating with climate change. The medieval warm period and the previously mentioned Little Ice Age were two long periods of climate change. They occurred before the Industrial Revolution, when carbon dioxide levels were much lower. Now, if increased CO2 causes climate change, what caused the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age? There's greater reason to believe sunspots caused those climate trends. The second thing overlooked about CO2 is its immense benefits. Princeton physics professor Freeman Dyson said in 2015, quote, "Earth is growing greener as a result of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere," end quote, and that the growth is measured by satellites. This makes a lot of sense because in basic biology, we are told plants use CO2 to grow. Dyson also said that about half of the CO2 in the atmosphere has gone into raising vegetation, which has increased by 20%. Increased CO2 means more growth to vegetation that not only regulates CO2, but also provides food for people. This should not be overlooked. We live in a complex world with a complex climate. There are way more factors at play than just carbon dioxide, as I've shown. 0.04% of the atmosphere cannot be given 100% of the blame for climate change. The reason why carbon dioxide is so focused on is because us humans affect it. But climate is greater than humans. The Earth has regulated its temperature for thousands of years, and it will continue to do so. CO2 does have a role in climate, but nothing to the scale that climate alarmists make it out to be. Even if we did get rid of carbon emissions, carbon dioxide would still exist, the sun would still go through phases, water vapor would adjust to those phases, and the Earth would still go through warming trends and cooling trends. Man-caused climate change is just a popular theory. Now, I want to bring your attention to the effects of climate change. And by effects, I mean the effects that climate change will have on the future of our Earth predicted by scientists. Often, in the headlines, you see claims that in 10, 20, 50, or 100 years, civilization as we know it will crumble and the world will end because of climate change. Climate alarmists present these timelines as facts in order to scare us into accepting their agenda. But these timelines are founded on lofty predictions. Climate scientists use climate models to make them. I have 5 reasons why those climate models are untrustworthy. First, past predictions and models have been false. In the 70s, there was a panic that the Earth's temperature was declining and would continue to decline. They believed we were entering a new ice age. Obviously, they now believe the opposite. Second, the technologies used to record data are relatively new. We are working with a handful of decades worth of satellite technology to observe climate change, and considering the history of the Earth, we still do not have enough information to totally understand Earth's climate. Third, climate models are better for explaining the trends that the Earth goes through, not for predicting them. Fourth, there are multiple paths the warming we're experiencing now could take. Just to keep this brief, there are some scientists who believe the Earth's climate hits tipping points and that this warming could lead to one tipping point that will bring us into a much different, colder climate. Fifth, the readings that the models are based off themselves are untrustworthy. In an IPCC report on climate change, there is recognition that there are adjustments made to temperature reports to make up for human influences in the areas like buildings, lack of vegetation, and body heat. M.J. Ord from Answers in Genesis says that factors like urbanization and the distribution of measurement stations could lead to a bias of 0.2 to 0.3 degrees Celsius. The warming since 1880 could be more like 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit. For these reasons, we should be hesitant to accept the timelines any side of the argument gives us. Whether climate models come from alarmists or skeptics, we should observe them wisely because at the end of the day, they are predictions, not facts. According to Freeman Dyson, quote, "The real world is far more complicated than the models," end quote. We live in an ever-changing world. Earth is so complex, interesting, and unpredictable. There's no way we can come to a definitive answer for what exactly causes climate change and what is to come. For crying out loud, we can't even predict the weather accurately 5 days from now. So what makes us think we can predict Earth's climate 5, 10, 50, or 100 years into the future? Mike Burrish, the chief meteorologist for Action News Jax, agrees with this too. He told me in my interview with him, quote, "Once you start trying to predict climate with any precision using climate models, I think you've gone outside the realm of reality," end quote. Yes, climate models are useful for better understanding why and how climate does the things it does, but we can't rely on their predictions. So now that we've analyzed the causes and the effects of climate change, let's look at the actions we have taken and propose to take based on the popular beliefs of those causes and effects. You'll find that these actions are unwise not only on the basis that man has no significant effect on climate and that the catastrophic predictions are theoretical, but also just that these actions carry important problems themselves. I first want to talk about the action that has been taken, funding, and reveal to you how much America and the world as a whole have spent on the climate change fight. I read an article from the Heritage Foundation a few months ago by economist Stephen Moore titled "Follow the Climate Change Money." In it, he gave some numbers of climate change spending in America and the world as a whole. Moore cited a piece from Forbes magazine that looked through the federal budget. He said there had been an estimated $150 billion in spending on climate change and green energy subsidies during President Obama's first term. To put that in perspective, that was about 8 years ago, $150 billion in 4 years. Moore also said that 5 years prior to his own article, the Climate Change Initiative, a leftist group, issued a study which found that global investment in climate change reached $359 billion that year. That was 2013. We're in 2020 now, and the funding just keeps coming. Climate change is costing our world hundreds of billions of dollars, but no progress has been made. Moore says, quote, "By the industry's own admission, there's been almost no progress worldwide in actually combating climate change," end quote, despite the almost $1 trillion poured into it. Before I make my point, I want to go into the other action, that which is proposed. Climate alarmist legislators have proposed drastic measures for our country to take to prevent the catastrophic climate event that they believe in. The main climate action bill proposed to Congress was the Green New Deal. Presented by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this plan involved the elimination of carbon emissions in 10 years. In 10 years, America would go from running on fossil fuels to strictly clean energy. This plan has two major problems with it though, that being the price tag and the economic changes. The price tag has a lot to do with the plan to upgrade all existing buildings and build new ones to, quote, "achieve maximum energy efficiency, water efficiency, safety, affordability, comfort, and durability, including through electrification," end quote. I've heard the price tag estimated to be around $5 trillion, but that's just an estimate. The economic changes are a result of self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist Ocasio-Cortez's agenda. The Green New Deal includes provisions of free healthcare and governmental programs that ensure that the public receives appropriate ownership stakes and returns. I don't want to go too far on a tangent here, so I just encourage you all to read the Green New Deal for yourselves. It's out on the internet. My point in talking about actions, those we have taken and plan on taking, is that they cost us an absurd amount of money, and especially plans like the Green New Deal would take a significant toll on our economy. I've shown that man does not have a leading role in climate change. I've shown that climate alarmism is based on untrustworthy climate models. Therefore, we shouldn't pour the billions and trillions of dollars we have and plan to pour into the climate change fight. The goal of the fight is to prevent a catastrophic climate event that likely won't happen, and our actions likely won't have an effect on the global warming we are experiencing now. I believe we should drastically reduce funding in climate change. We are fighting a costly fight against an imaginary threat. I believe that kind of money should go towards problems that threaten America and the world right now. Pollution is one problem, for example. We should invest more money into developing cheaper biodegradable products, more efficient recycling, and reducing landfills. We should fight against actual air pollution, not the kind called CO2. I'm also open to introducing renewable energy into the country on a broad scale. But renewable energy is not yet efficient enough to properly run the country without us cutting down major forests to build enormous solar farms. Therefore, we should put more funds into developing more efficient renewable energy and find a way to make it cheaper. The moral of the story is that the money our country spends on climate change is wasteful, and we should put that money towards actual problems. Now, what should we as Christians think about all this? Well, putting down the science for 1 second and looking at the truth of God's word, it's clear that we should not live in fear. Concerning the day when Jesus returns and heaven and earth will pass away, Jesus says in Matthew 24:36 that only God knows the day and the hour. So until then, we must trust in God's goodness and providence to bring us through any trial. God's will prevail. We also shouldn't fear using fossil fuels. Genesis 1:28 is the creation mandate. The Gospel Coalition defines it as the ongoing charge to humanity and the power and blessing of God to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, and to gently subdue and to cultivate the earth. We as Christians know it is okay to cultivate and use the resources of the earth. Fossil fuels, like coal, are a result of the flood in Genesis 7. God commands us to use the earth's resources, and he provided fossil fuels through the flood. Therefore, we should not have regrets in our use of fossil fuels, just as long as we use them responsibly, as we should in all things. But notice how I said let's put down science for a second as we look to the Bible. Luckily, we don't have to do that. The common belief among non-believers is that Christians don't believe in science and that we're just ignorant. The problem is Christians don't really search for the facts. The reality of the matter is that there are plenty of resources and facts out there to support our beliefs. I was nervous I wouldn't find much to support my belief that we shouldn't worry about climate change, but as I've shown, there's a large counter-argument to climate alarmism, and this counter-argument is shared by Christians and non-Christians alike. I encourage all of you to search for yourselves into the truths of climate change. Two great resources I found extremely useful were Answers in Genesis and RealClimateScience.com. It's time that we show the world that Christianity and science go hand in hand. The truth is out there. All you have to do is look it up. Thank you.